Okay, shalom everyone. Today is April 9th, and we are here at Eidos for the final class on themes in the Haggadah, themes of freedom in the Haggadah. And today's topic is curiosity and freedom or curiosity and the Haggadah. This is a topic that the more time I spend on it, the more and more interesting connections I find between curiosity and Pesach, and curiosity and the Haggadah. So what I'd like to do tonight is after uh, uh, look first directly at the Haggadah, see where we have elements of curiosity, and then we'll look at things related to Pesach, not really in a so,
I just thought of one that is perfect.
yeah.
Curiosity killed the cat. We killed the cat.
Right. Okay. Excellent. You know what? I have not thought about that one. And like I said, the more we spend time on this, yeah, it wasn't the curiosity vehicle shunra, but something vehicle shunra. Okay. So take notes in an essay in a collection of essays about Pesach called Festival. He notes two aspects. There are two aspects of freedom. One he calls the juridic political, which is a fancy way of saying someone who is physically enslaved. And the other is the typological personalistic, which comes along with the juridic political, but also I think can stand alone. And that is like, what is the personality of a slave? That's where Rabbi Soloveitchik is interested in thinking about when he talks about this, and he fleshes it out. Under the first aspect, slavery is identical with an institution based upon the totalitarian conception of private property. That is, that the institution of private property is all inclusive, embracing inanimate and animate things as well as human beings, right? This terrible notion that a human being can be owned by another human being. That is juridic political. It's a legal status, if you will, of a person. Okay. The body of a human slave with all his skills and talents belongs not to the slave, but to someone else. Right? That is juridic political aspect of slavery. Under the second aspect, slavery represents a class of people who think, feel, and act in a distinct manner, thus reflecting a peculiar personality. We discussed this already once when we read the passage from Rabbi Soloveitchik, where he suggested that the slave does not have the capacity to do chesed, right? Because the slave is so focused. Not that they don't have the legal capacity to do chesed. Do you want one more, or are you going to pass on back to more? They may have the legal capacity to do chesed, but they don't have the personality to do chesed because they're so worried about their own survival. They're so worried about their own well-being that they don't have the headspace, if you were, to think about someone else. So that's one example that Rabbi Soloveitchik talks about, I think, in a different essay. These two kinds of serfdom or slavery, the juridic and the personalistic, do not always go hand in hand. When we read in the Haggadah, we shall say before you a new song, Al Geulatenu v'al Pedut Nafshenu.
It's not what we say.
No?
We do not say V'nomar lefanecha. We say V'nomar lefanav.
And what does that mean?
We say before him.
Before him. Okay. But nevertheless.
Isn't that right? V'nomar lefanav.
You're right. Yeah, it's true. But maybe it's a translation thing or maybe a girsa thing.
Did the Rav write this in English?
I do not believe these were essays. I think they were probably talks. I'm not sure. I have to look at the introduction.
Somebody's English is incredible.
Yeah.
I read that he never wrote anything down that he had ascribed to his.
I think for these things, these are real manuscripts
Ah.
of his. So it says, which I'll say before you or him, I don't think it changes his point.
No,
A new song, Al Ge'ulatenu v'Apudut Nafshenu, those seems to be the same. And he says, but they're not the same. For our redemption and the freedom of our souls, we are referring to two kinds of slavery. First, Ge'ulatenu indicates that we are set free from juridic political slavery. Second, Al Padut Nafshenu, right? That's a beautiful insight here. Like our nefesh, our soul, our personality is also freed. It means that we have rid ourselves of the restrictive slave personality. And then he has another proof of this. The Rambam Maimonides refers to the same distinction when he writes that the parent should tell the child that on this night, Pada Otano Kadosh Baruch Hu v'yatzenu lecherut. There were two things. He redeemed us and took us to freedom. We would argue that those are the same things. Why is the Rambam being redundant? Why is the Haggadah being redundant? And the Rabbi Soloveitchik's point is they're not redundant. There are two different types of slavery. One is the political, juridic, and the other is the juridic political, and the other is the personalistic. I'd like to suggest that one of the typological personalistic elements of a slave is lack of curiosity or the inability to be curious. We'll get to that a little bit later, but let's first look at where this notion of curiosity appears in the Haggadah and in Pesach in general. So the first may be a source that we're familiar with, which is Pesachim 115b. This is the end of the last chapter, where there's a discussion, as I mentioned, I think in one of the other classes, the last chapter of Pesachim, you read the Mishnayot, goes through essentially what is the Haggadah. Like if you don't have a Haggadah in your house, and you happen to have a Mishnah, open up to the 10th parak of Pesachim, follow that, you'll more or less get to where you need to be. And the Gemara fleshes it out. Lama okrin at at some point we're told to remove the table. We don't do this anymore generally, because I think this is talking about a situation where everyone had a little snack table or something similar to that in front of them, and it's removed. But why was that done? Amar debei Rabbi Yanai kadeshi yakiru tinokot v'yishalu. So the children will notice something is strange, and they will ask a question. Abaye ve'yativ kamei derabba, chaza deka midli taka mikamei. Abaye was sitting before Rabbah and saw that the tray was taken up before him. Amar lu adayin lo ka'achlinan. We haven't eaten yet. Why are you taking the table away? Atu kame ikari taka mikaman. Right, and you've already come to take the table away from us. Amar le Rabbah pitartan milomar manashtana. Rabbah says, "Oh, now we don't have to say manashtana anymore because." In his view, it's not those four questions that are essential, it's that questions are essential. And we do things at the Seder to rouse the curiosity, if you will, or the interest of the children so that they ask questions. But you see the very first line of this Gemara, the reason we move the table away is so that the children will ask. So a fundamental element of the Seder night is to arouse the curiosity of the children and to arouse the curiosity of everyone who is there. And now we're going to see something really interesting in the Haggadah. Many years ago, there was a rabbi, a scholar rabbi, and I think he was a rabbi. His last name was Gesundheit. I kid you not. And he was a biblical scholar and a biblical scholar, and he wrote this really fascinating article, essentially saying that there are 4 Haggadot within the Haggadah. And each 4 is a different way of telling the story, a different way of answering the questions. And one of the things he points out is that there are 4 times that questions appear in the Haggadah. Okay, so let's do some audience participation here. What are the 4? First one is the 4 questions. Right, Manishtana. Excellent. The second set are the 4 children. Chacham, Rasha, Tam, Shem, and Shol. They are part, for if you look on page 2, Chacham Mahu Omer. This is actually two questions. What does the wise son say? Maha edut v'chukim. He asks a question. What does the Rasha say? Maha avodah hazot. What does the Tam say? Mazot. And the She'enu Yedei L'Shol doesn't have a question. So that's the second set of questions. So those were the ones which I'm more familiar with. Again, the first one is the Manish Tana, which I have here, just in case you don't know them, you don't remember them. And then you have these four questions of the Chacham, Rasha, Tam, She'enu L'Shol. Okay, we need two more. Is that a question or a statement?
Comma means how many?
How many?
Unless it's a declaration with an
right.
exclamation mark.
That's not on my list, only because it's not on Rabbi Gesundheit's list. I guess he sees it.
What's his first name?
I don't remember.
You sure it's a, because there's a Benny Gesundheit who's alive and well, living in a lone.
Yeah, I think that's it. Maybe that's his son, one or the other. We can look it up afterwards.
Benny is a cousin of a cousin. He's alive and well, living in a lone shvut, and
Yeah, this is a contemporary person.
yeah.
Yeah.
We have a Gesundheit family here in Denver.
Do we? All right, we'll have to check if they're relatives. All right, what are the other two sets of questions? So we have on the top of page 3, say ulamad, ma bikesh lavan arami lasot liyakov avinu. What did Lavan Harami want to do to Yaakov Avinu? That's question number 3. And finally, the fourth set of questions is in the Rabban Gamliel section, where we say, Rabban Gamliel said, this is on page 3 also, if you don't say these 3 things at the Seder, we haven't filled our obligation. And what are they? Pesach al Shumma. Matzah al Shumma. Maror al Shumma. Right? Right? We don't just say, the Haggadah could have done this. The composers of the Haggadah simply could have said, Pesach al Shum shepasach HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Matzah al Shum, Maror al Shum, without first phrasing a question. But they do. It's in the form of a question, right? Pesach sha'anu sha'ayu avotenu ochlim b'man beit hamikdash hakayam al shuma. So 4 sets of questions. The 4 questions. Pesach that we eat, that the Pesach that our ancestors ate, is for what? Al shuma. Same thing with the matzah. The matzah that we eat, al shuma. If you would translate it, it would be, for what purpose do we eat the Pesach? For what purpose do we eat the matzah? For what purpose do we eat the maror? Instead of simply saying, we eat the maror because we eat the matzah, right? It could have just said it to us in a statement, but it gives us a new question. What's that?
Yeah, it's a question mark.
Yeah. So 4 times in the Seder, scattered throughout the Seder, we have questions. To me, that seems to indicate that asking questions, posing questions, expressing our curiosity is an essential way that we are supposed to tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. In fact, Rabbi Soloveitchik asks a question. He wants to know what's the difference between the daily mitzvah of Zechirat Yetziat Mitzrayim. Every single day we have an obligation to remember the Exodus from Egypt. And once a year we have a mitzvah to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. What's the difference?
Articulating it verbally.
So one of them is, when it comes to remembering it daily, it could be quick, a sentence.
Not even, I can remember something
I think
cerebrally without
maybe
articulating.
Could be, right? But on Pesach, we have to articulate it, and there are details. There are props on Seder night. We don't need props on a daily basis. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says one of the differences also is this is done through question and answer. Right? The story of Yetziat Mitzrayim is done through Q&A. All leading to this notion. And then the question is why, right? Why do we focus on questions on the night of the Seder? And I'm suggesting it goes back to Rabbi Soloveitchik's point of this notion of personalistic slavery. that the very hallmark of a free person is the ability to ask questions, right? A slave cannot say to their master, well, why is it that you think it's important that I move this rock from this pile to this pile? Or why is it, master, do you think it's important that I do X, Y, and Z, right? The very definition of a slave is that they do not have the right to ask those questions. Those are not, that's what makes the person a slave. What makes a person a free person is the ability to question why they've been asked what to do. Right? In a healthy work environment, that's not a slave. The associate could ask the partner, well, why do you think we should go about it this way? Maybe I have another suggestion, sort of thing. If it's a healthy environment, if the partner doesn't consider themselves a master and the associate a slave. And that's why I think that there's so much focus in the Haggadah itself about questions. There's always like the joke. I'm sure you heard this joke. Given any question, Rabbi, why do we do this at the Seder? Answer, so the children will ask. Right? It's a joke, but it's not such a joke, because that's the whole point, is to exercise this element of freedom by asking questions. Yeah.
So, child of a slave hasn't yet learned that he's not supposed to ask questions. So, as children do, they keep on saying why, and that's why we get children to say why.
Maybe, could be but if there are no children, the adults have to say monish.
That was COVID. I was young.
Right.
My job.
Right. When was the last time you did that? Before COVID.
Before I was 10.
Before you were 10. 6, 7 years ago. Right.
Actually.
Yes.
When you study a Gemara, you have a Mishnah. Then after the Mishnah, the Gemara goes through the stipulations of the Mishnah and tries to make sense of them. So, in telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim in the Haggadah, every point of the story is elaborated upon. How many plagues were there? And the hand, the
fingers, right? The hand, right?
The 500, how many?
The fuzzy math of the Makkah.
Yeah. So in that sense, the narrative of the Haggadah is already about questioning. We might say at that point on an adult level.
Yes. Okay. Right. It's not
the children,
right.
The children and the guests who don't know anything about Torah will be puzzled, etc., by it, while more knowledgeable people will be able to delve into this more comfortably, because that's how you learn in the Talmud.
Yes. Right. Well put. Well said. Yes. Okay. Now let's expand this a little bit. We may be aware that the beginning of the redemption was when God chose a messenger. Right? God chose Moshe as the messenger to go to Paro and to the Jewish people and to tell Paro that it's over. And if you don't set the people free, there's going to be trouble. So why is it that God chose Moshe? So there's one famous midrash where Moshe was serving as the shepherd for his father-in-law, and one little shepsela got lost and got hurt or dehydrated, and Moshe picked up the sheep on his shoulder and walked the sheep back to the flock to get water. And the midrash there is suggesting that if Moshe was so compassionate to this one sheep, he's the right person. He has the right level of compassion to save the Jewish people. Also, similarly, he protected Miriam at the well when she was being harassed by the other shepherds. So Moshe had this, and he killed the Egyptian who was Tzipporah, excuse me, Tzipporah, thank you. And he killed the Egyptian who was attacking the Jew in Egypt. So Moshe had this inherent concern for other people. But there may be another reason as well. Yes.
He was curious about the snap.
Yes, exactly. That's my point. Thank you. He was curious about the burning bush. If we look on page 4, second source, it says that Moshe was tending the flock of his father-in-law, and Vayar Malach Hashem Elav Belabat Eish Mitoch Hasneh. The messenger of God appeared to him in a blazing fire out of the bush. He gazed and he saw the bush was aflame, but it wasn't being consumed. Moshe said, "This is strange. There's a bush that's burning, but it's not being consumed. I want to know why. I'm curious." And so he goes over to the sneh. Vayar, and then listen to Pasuk Dalet. This is amazing. Vayar Hashem kisar lirot. When God saw that Moshe turned aside, meaning he broke from his routine, whatever his route was, whatever his routine was, to go where he was going, he broke from his routine. Then Vayikra elav Elokim mitoch hasneh vayomer Moshe v'yom hineni. Only after God saw that Moshe stopped to see what was going on with the sneh, that's when God called. This is the moment that Moshe is chosen. And one could make the argument, it's a result of his curiosity. A number of Mefarshim suggest that this was Moshe's curiosity. He wanted to see what was going on. And I've been told, although I've been looking for this midrash for weeks, I've been asked about it, makes me believe that it doesn't exist, but it would be great if it did. That many people passed by, there's a midrash suggesting that many people passed by this sneh and did not stop, and did not turn away, and did not exercise a curiosity. So I want to be clear, I have not yet seen that midrash inside, but I've been told by more than one person, and I've tried to find it. I've asked people, no luck. Even Google couldn't find it for me. In any case,
AI.
right, I tried that too. I asked AI to write the midrash for me, and I could bring it into you and say, "Look, I found the midrash," but that didn't work either. But I think this is a really fascinating point, and there is a midrash that expands on this. Vayomer Moshe Asura Nava Erem. Moshe said, "I will turn aside." Rabbi Yochanan Amar Shalosh Pesiyot Pasar Moshe. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar Lo Pasa Ela Savaro Ike. Rabbi Yochanan said he took 3 steps sort of out of his way to see what was going on. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said he didn't move, but he just sort of craned his neck to observe it. But what does God say here? Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Nitzar Talerot Chayecha She'ata Kedai She'eglei Elecha. The Midrash is explicit about this. That God said, because you trouble to look, be assured that you will merit, I shall reveal myself unto you. You're the one. The Midrash is explicit that God chose Moshe because of his curiosity. And we can have a discussion about what's the difference to taking 3 steps or just craning his neck. Could be that curiosity could be manifested in going somewhere to see something, or curiosity be manifested about just thinking more about something. Those are both elements of curiosity, but nevertheless, the Midrash is explicit that God says to Moshe, the reason I'm going to reveal myself to you is because, and the reason why you are going to be take them out is because you exercised curiosity. Yeah.
This happened to Abraham. Abraham was also curious. He looked around and he made inferences from what he could see, and
Correct.
Hashem talked to him. And in a certain sense, I'm looking at this and seeing this is something that is available to every one of us.
Right.
We just have to see that there's a bush that's burning and not being.
Or a voice that's
consumed.
calling us, right?
No, just seeing the bush, that's not being consumed and understand, in other words, see the world around us, see the people around us and understand the presence of Hashem. Hashem will speak to us.
So the Svat Emet on the Avraham story says that God's call was out loud for everyone to hear, but only Avraham heard it, which is a beautiful thing, right? Like exactly you said, it's available to everyone. You have to be wanting to, willing to tap into it. So it is a similar idea. That was pointed out to me today by some colleagues. Okay. I want to expand now beyond Pesach and just look at a couple of other sources that talk about curiosity, which I think are really interesting. This is from Rabbi Soloveitchik on page 5. Right? Avraham sends Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzchak. And we have this beautiful passage from an essay by Rabbi Soloveitchik called The Rav Speaks, which is a collection of essays he gave to the Mizrahi, right, the religious Zionists. I think there are I think 6 essays. They were first published, 5 essays. They were first published in Yiddish as the 4 drushas, the 4 drushot, and then one was added, and the English now is called The Rav Speaks, and the Hebrew is called Chamesh drushot. And there's no, they didn't redo the Yiddish. So listen to this. Before Eliezer finally made up his mind to choose Rivka for Yitzchak, he turned to her with a question. Whose daughter are you? Tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to lodge in? When she answered, and room to lodge in, Eliezer was convinced that she was suitable for Yitzchak. So most of us read this and probably think that what Eliezer was looking for was hospitality. He wanted to see if Rivka came from a home where they were a hospitable home, because Avram had a hospitable home, and Yitzchak's going to have a hospitable home, and Eliezer wants to make sure that Yitzchak's wife is going to be comfortable with that practice. Whereas Soloveitchik completely is a very different approach. Why was the quality of welcoming strangers so important in Avram's house? He says, because this quality reflects a spiritual attitude towards others. When a Jew senses that he is far from perfection, that he cannot always show others the way, that he lacks intelligence and understanding, that he has much to learn from others, from strangers, that others, though they are less than he, can tell him something new, that he needs a ransom for the soul, that every guest is important, since by means of every man one may discover a fresh insight into eternal truth, and a new light may shine with the appearance of the stranger. What was Eliezer looking for in a wife for Yitzchak? Someone who was curious, who was willing to learn from others. That is what Eliezer thought was needed to continue this chain from Avram to Yitzchak. Curiosity is based on the idea, the admission, I don't know everything. So every opportunity to speak to another person or to host another person in my house is a chance for me to learn from them. How can I let that go? Right? How can I give up the opportunity to talk to someone or to host someone? Not only is it the nice thing to do to give them a pillow at night, but I, as an imperfect human being, I could be one step closer to perfection, because I'm going to learn something from this person. When a Jew is convinced of his own righteousness, of his scholarship and wisdom, when he thinks that he can never err, when in his opinion he has no need to give a ransom for the soul, and he is not therefore obliged with the half shekel, he is unable to perform the mitzvah of welcoming guests. For what have they to teach him? Is there room in thy father's house for us to lodge? Is there room in thy father's house for the message of Abraham, who brings a new word, meaning she was willing to hear what Abraham heard, what Abraham was saying, and her willingness to hear what Abraham was saying convinced Eliezer that she was worthy of being the wife of Yitzchak. I long for something which my father's house cannot give me. I thirst for new tidings. I am ready to sit all night and listen to the stories you will tell of the mysterious Abraham who left us so many years ago. Someone pointed out to me that this could explain why on Pesach, from all of the Chagim, it's customary to have such large crowds at our seders. Because if Pesach is about freedom and curiosity is an element of freedom, and the way we exercise curiosity is by a willingness and a desire to learn from others, then we want other people at our Seder table who are going to share different views, who are going to open up different interpretations of the Haggadah, of the story, than the ones we are familiar with or the ones that we like. Lo and behold, we may hear something that we haven't heard before. We may like it, we may not like it, but it'll bring us a step closer towards perfection. Yeah.
So Moshe is defined as a humble man. What does it mean to him to be a humble man? He's humble enough to learn from other people.
Yeah, it could be. That is an element of humility.
Consistent with it.
With their own, yeah, for sure.
Where do you draw the line, Mike? You open up the door. If be curious when Steve really here or whatever it would be, is that being a bit of a, for lack of a better word, an upper course? You know, hey, but
Well, we open the door. We open the door to symbolically welcome in Eliyahu. We open the door to express it's the Chag of Emunah, it's the holiday of faith that we believe that we're safe, even though we open the door. Right? It's customary we don't say Kriyat Shema al Hamitah on Seder night because we believe that we have God's protection. Because it's Leil Shimurim, it's the night that God protected us in Mitzrayim, and every year since God protects us. So I think that's more about we open the door. I don't think it's we are an apikoros if we don't feel Eliyahu's presence. Eliyahu is also seen as a protector, so it's also within that theme.
so curiosity cannot be seen as a negative.
I was thinking about this as I was preparing this. I don't think curiosity in and of itself is a negative. I think that there may be certain beliefs, certain practices that we may know about, and in the end, reject. Right? Curiosity doesn't mean accepting everything. Curiosity means learning and then deciding based on our values what of those elements we want to include in our life. So, sometimes people would rather not encourage curiosity because it may welcome what they would consider inappropriate beliefs, and then they're too hard. Once you've opened the can of worms, so to speak, it's too hard, or the barrel of monkeys, can of worms. What is it? You can't.
I mean, this
Right.
look what happened with Rambam. After Rambam wrote the Sefer Hamori,
Right.
and the Rashba says nobody should study
Right.
philosophy till age 25.
Right.
So, blanket. Ramban doesn't want people learning.
Right. So that's an approach that some people take. Another approach is there's great wisdom in the world. We have to be curious to try to find it, and at the same time that we're teaching our children to be curious, we also teach them certain morals and values that we think are important. So if they happen to come across ideas or practices that are objectionable in our eyes, they'll be able to to make up, to make wise choices.
To proceed with investigation, but to have the judgment to arrive at the right.
Exactly. It doesn't always work. Doesn't always work, which is what some people, they rather have a more sort of cloistered experience. It doesn't always work. That's for sure. Okay. Yes,
Curious
excellent.
if, to be curious is, a slave cannot be curious and cannot ask questions. Does that mean that if I'm not curious, it's a form of slavery?
Right. So there could be like a self-imposed, yes. It could be like it is true that some people are naturally more curious than others. I believe that that's true. So someone who's naturally not curious, okay. But sometimes people stop other people from learning or being exposed to certain ideas, hashkafot, approaches to life. That could be imposing a type of slavery on them.
I would be remiss if I didn't quote Bob Marley at this point.
Excellent.
Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind.
Right. Okay.
And that goes to your point that you can be self-limiting with your own curiosity, which is imprisoning or enslaving yourself. And if you want to break out of the mental slavery or whatever fancy words the rabbi chose here to describe mental slavery,
Personalistic.
that's right. It's the personalistic. So you have to break yourself out of it and allow yourself to, through the curiosity, I suppose.
Let's just look at, that's great. Let's look at two more examples of this. Let's look at page 6 on your own, the Midrash about Rabbi Akiva. His curiosity led to his greatness. But I want to look at this really interesting source on page 7. This is from David Brin. Anyone hear of David Brin? David Brin is a science fiction, a Jewish science fiction writer. I have never read a science fiction book in my life. I guess that's a problem. It shows I'm not curious enough about that. But a friend of mine pointed out that this gentleman is Jewish, not observant, but in his book called Earth, he has the following conversation. Monsignor, according to the Bible, what was the very first injunction laid by the Lord upon our first creator? Let me scan and refresh. I think I see what you refer to, the paragraph in which he, the Lord, has Adam name all the beasts. Is that it? But that's a minor thing. Nobody considers it important. Not important? The very first request by the creator of his creation, the only request that has nothing to do with the repair work of mortality or rescue from sin, would such a thing have been mentioned so prominently if the Lord were merely idly curious? And by the way, the verses are on the previous page, where God created all the animals, and he brought them all to Adam to name them. God asked Adam to name all the animals. That's what he's talking about here. Go back to page 7. Please, I see others queued for questions. Your point is only this. Our original purpose clearly was to glorify God by going forth, comprehending and naming the creature's works, the creator's works. Therefore, aren't zoologists crawling through the jungle, struggling to name endangered species before they go extinct, doing holy labor? Or take even those camera-bearing probes we have sent to other planets. What is the first thing we do when an awe-inspiring vista of some faraway moon are transmitted back to our little robot envoys? We reverently name the craters, valleys, and other strange beasts discovered out there. So it's just an interesting take on the Torah. I think he's saying is that this notion of finding things and seeking things and categorizing them and naming them, right? That's the first thing that God asked Adam to do. The first thing that God asked Adam to do was to exercise his curiosity by deciding what the best name for all these animals is. And has nothing to do with saving the world. God also said to Adam to pru, be fruitful, multiply. That's about continuing the species. This wasn't an element of continuing the species. It was simply about curiosity. And this reader, picks up on it. And as I was reading this today, I remembered, and we'll see this on the final page I handed out, I was reminded of this essay, Rabbi Soloveitchik, called Majesty and Humility, where, as Rabbi Soloveitchik does, he gives us two elements of the human being: the cosmic person, I forget what he calls the other person, the local person or the grounded person. And the cosmic person, he writes, first man is cosmic through his intellectual involvement. His intellectual curiosity is of cosmic universal dimensions. He wants to know not only about the things that are close to him, as for example, the flowering bush in his backyard, but also about things far removed from him, things and events millions of light years away. Human cosmic inquisitiveness borders almost on the arrogant. Man is restless because he has not yet resolved the mysterium magnum of the cosmic drama. Remoteness magnifies rather than diminishes man's curiosity. The farther the object, the greater and more hypnotic the curiosity. Man asks himself, to whom does the universe belong? The answer was given by the psalmist: the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. To whom did God entrust this earth and its fullness? To man who studies and comprehends the cosmic drama. Ownership of the stars, the planets, and the dark interplanetary or interstellar spaces is granted by the Almighty only to those who make the effort to understand. And he goes on in this vein as well. So this is Rabbi Soloveitchik's ode to curiosity. And that this, not only, it's more than that. He's saying that this is part and parcel of the way God made us. God made us curious. We want to travel. We want to see new things. We want to conquer space. We want to conquer science. We ask a lot of questions. God also made us homebodies. That's where Soloveitchik operates. He'll give us, 6 pages on why we're cosmic man and 6 pages on why we're local man, and say, really, we are both. But part and parcel of our personality is the explorer, the adventurer, the curious person. So we've gone from sort of local appreciation of curiosity about Pesach, that Pesach is about curiosity, that the Redeemer who acted with God was chosen, one could argue, only because of his curiosity. The notion that freedom that is defined in part by the ability to be curious, to a more cosmic understanding that curiosity is a general trait that God has instilled in us, and something that allows us not only to be in relationship, that allows us, to be in relationship with God. We want to better understand the universe so that also we could better understand God. So the scientist, this very much goes according to Rabbi Soloveitchik's worldview, the scientist on some level, on every level maybe, is doing holy work, because the scientist wants to understand God's world, and they use their curiosity to try to get there. So I think I'll stop there in terms of this is the connection between curiosity, the Haggadah, curiosity and Pesach, and the importance of curiosity in general as referenced by Rabbi Soloveitchik. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Any final comments or questions? If not, we'll say Laila Tov. Thank you all for joining these 3 classes. And we'll talk about, have another series after Pesach. And until then, Shabbat Shalom. Chag Kasher B'Sameach. Hope to see you all again soon.
Bye-bye.